What do you do when the heavens fall silent? When the carefully constructed world you have built, the life you have lived with integrity, with faith, with honor, suddenly implodes not into blessing, but into a firestorm that consumes everything you have ever known, everything you have ever loved. What is the posture of the soul when your carefully tended garden turns to ash overnight, and the God you have served, the universe you believed was governed by a benevolent order, offers you nothing in return but a cold, indifferent, and utterly deafening silence? This is not a theoretical question posed in the sterile quiet of a lecture hall. It is the raw, visceral cry that echoes from the deepest chambers of the human heart in moments of profound and inexplicable loss. It is the crucible, the fiery furnace, in which the human spirit is either shattered into a million irreparable pieces, or it is forged, through unimaginable pressure and heat, into something unbreakable, something tempered by a faith that transcends understanding. We live in a world that is saturated with suffering. We see it in the headlines, we witness it in the lives of those around us, and we inevitably experience its brutal touch in our own journeys. And in the face of this stark reality, the easy answers crumble. The neat, tidy formulas that promise prosperity for the righteous and punishment for the wicked often ring hollow against the backdrop of real, lived tragedy. We are left grappling with the most ancient and agonizing of questions. Why? Why do good people suffer? If God is good, why does He allow such pain? If He is all-powerful, why doesn't He intervene? These are not questions born of cynical doubt, but often of a desperate, wounded faith, a faith that is straining to reconcile the goodness of God with the harshness of reality. And there is one story, one ancient and terrifying and breathtakingly beautiful epic, preserved for us in the heart of the Scriptures, that serves as the ultimate map, the divine guide, for this harrowing journey into the very heart of suffering. It does not offer us easy answers. It does not provide us with a neat formula to solve the equation of pain. Instead, it offers us something far more valuable. It offers us a companion for the journey. It offers us a portrait of a man who walked through the deepest possible darkness, who wrestled with God in the midst of his agony, and who emerged on the other side, not with answers, but with an encounter that changed everything. This is the story of Job, and it is perhaps the story of us all. It is the story of the unbreakable human spirit, yes, but more profoundly, it is the story of the inscrutable, the wild, and the ultimately trustworthy character of the God who meets us not in the absence of the storm, but in the very eye of the whirlwind. Let us journey together into this profound inquiry, not as detached observers, but as fellow travelers, seeking not to solve the mystery of suffering, but to find the presence of God within it. Our story begins not in darkness, but in a world bathed in the brilliant, almost blinding, light of divine blessing. We are introduced to a man named Job, living in the land of Uzi, a place outside the immediate covenant community of Israel, reminding us from the outset that the themes we are about to explore are universal. And Job is presented not as an ordinary man, but as an exemplar, a paragon of human righteousness and prosperity. The scripture uses superlative language to describe him. He was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. This is not just a human assessment. This is the divine verdict. There was no one on earth like him. He was, in essence, the model citizen of God's kingdom on earth, a man whose life perfectly embodied the ideals of piety and integrity. And his external circumstances perfectly reflected this internal state. He was a man of immense wealth, a titan of his age. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, a vast fortune by any ancient standard. He had a large number of servants, signifying his status and influence. He was the greatest man among all the people of the East. His prosperity was not just material, it extended to the heart of his life, his family. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, a perfect number signifying completeness and blessing. His family life was characterized by joy and harmony, with his children regularly feasting together in each other's homes. Job was not just a successful businessman. He was a devoted father. We see his deep spiritual concern for his children. After their days of feasting, Job would rise early in the morning and sacrifice burnt offerings for each of them, thinking, "Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts." This was his regular practice. He was a man who lived in a constant state of God consciousness, a man whose piety extended to the deepest concerns of his heart for the spiritual well-being of his family. He was, by all accounts, living the dream. He was the embodiment of the wisdom literature's promise that righteousness leads to blessing, that faithfulness is rewarded with prosperity. He was a walking, breathing fortress of divine favor, secure in his wealth, joyful in his family, and blameless in his faith. It is absolutely crucial that we grasp the sheer height from which Job is about to fall. The story deliberately establishes his extraordinary righteousness and his extraordinary blessedness at the outset, precisely to dismantle the simplistic equation that suffering is always a direct result of personal sin. Job is not a cautionary tale about a secret hypocrite who finally gets what he deserves. He is the ultimate test case for the question, what happens when the inexplicable storm falls not on the wicked, but on the righteous? What happens when the very foundations of a just and ordered universe seem to crumble? The story sets up Job as the perfect candidate for this profound inquiry precisely because his suffering makes no sense according to the conventional wisdom of his time, and often of our own. He is the man who did everything right, and yet everything is about to go catastrophically wrong. The narrative then takes a dramatic and unexpected turn, pulling back the curtain from the earthly stage to reveal a scene unfolding in the heavenly realms. This is a crucial and often misunderstood part of the story. It provides a divine perspective, a cosmic context for the suffering that is about to be unleashed, a context that Job himself will never be privy to during his ordeal. The scene is a meeting of the heavenly council. One day the angels came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came with them. The figure of Satan here, Ha-Satan in Hebrew, is not necessarily the fully formed devil figure of later theology, but acts more like a celestial prosecuting attorney, an accuser, whose role is to roam the earth and to test the sincerity of human righteousness. The Lord initiates the conversation, highlighting his faithful servant Job. "Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil." God himself is boasting about Job's integrity. He is holding him up as the prime example of genuine human faithfulness. But the accuser responds with a cynical and a deeply probing question. Does Job fear God for nothing? This is the heart of the challenge. Satan is suggesting that Job's piety is not disinterested. It is not a genuine love for God himself. It is merely a form of spiritual transaction. Job serves God, the argument goes, because God has blessed him so abundantly. His righteousness is just a byproduct of his prosperity. Take away the blessings, Satan implies, and Job's faith will evaporate. Have you not put a hedge around him and his household and everything he has? Satan asks. You have blessed the work of his hands, so that his flocks and herds are spread throughout the land. But now stretch out your hand and strike everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face. This is a profound and a deeply uncomfortable challenge. It questions the very possibility of a genuine, disinterested love for God. Can human beings love God for who he is, or only for what he gives? Is faith just a form of cosmic insurance policy? The Lord, in his sovereign wisdom and his perfect confidence in his servant, accepts the challenge. He gives the accuser permission to test Job's faith by striking his possessions and his family, but with one crucial limitation. Very well, then, everything he has is in your power, but on the man himself do not lay a finger. This heavenly council scene is not primarily about explaining the cause of Job's suffering in a simplistic way, i.e., Satan did it. Rather, it is about revealing the purpose of his suffering within a larger, cosmic drama. Job's life is about to become a testing ground, a battlefield, where the fundamental question of the nature of faith and the character of God is being contested before an unseen audience of heavenly beings. His suffering is not meaningless, it is freighted with cosmic significance. God is allowing this test not because he doubts Job, but because he intends to vindicate both Job's integrity and his own wisdom in blessing such a man. Job himself will never know about this heavenly wager. He will grapple with his suffering in the darkness, unaware of the larger context. And this is a crucial part of the story's realism. We, too, rarely understand the full cosmic significance of our own trials while we are in the midst of them. We are called to endure, to trust, to wrestle, without the benefit of the divine perspective. The prologue pulls back the curtain for us, the readers, so that we can understand that Job's suffering is not a sign of God's displeasure, but is, in a mysterious way, part of a divine plan to reveal a deeper truth about the nature of faith itself. The storm breaks upon Job with a suddenness and a ferocity that is almost unimaginable. The hedge of protection that Satan had complained about is removed, and in a single, catastrophic day, Job's entire world collapses into ash. The narrative unfolds with a relentless, machine gun-like series of messengers, each bearing news of a fresh disaster, each arriving while the previous one is still speaking, emphasizing the overwhelming and suffocating speed of the calamity. The first messenger arrives, breathless and terrified. He reports that Sabaean raiders have attacked Job's oxen and donkeys while they were plowing, carried them off, and put the servants tending them to the sword. "I am the only one who has escaped to tell you," he gasps. This is a devastating blow to Job's agricultural wealth and his workforce. But before Job can even process this, while the first messenger is still speaking, a second arrives. This time, the disaster is not human, but seemingly divine. "The fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants," he reports. "I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." This points perhaps to a lightning strike or some other natural, fiery catastrophe, but its description as the fire of God adds a layer of terrifying theological implication. Has God himself turned against Job? While the second messenger is still speaking, a third arrives. Chaldean raiders, notorious desert warriors, have formed 3 raiding parties, swept down on Job's camels, carried them off, and put the servants to death with the sword. "I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." The pattern is relentless. Job's vast commercial wealth, represented by the camels, is gone in an instant. His entire economic empire, built over a lifetime of diligence and integrity, has been wiped out in a matter of hours. He has lost his livestock, his servants, the very foundations of his prosperity. But the accuser is not finished. The assault now moves from Job's possessions to the very heart of his life, his children. While the third messenger is still speaking, a fourth arrives, his face a mask of unspeakable grief. He reports that Job's sons and daughters were feasting in the oldest brother's house when suddenly, a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house. The house collapsed on them, and they are all dead. All 10 children. Gone in a single, freak moment of natural disaster. "I am the only one who has escaped to tell you." This is the final, soul-crushing blow. It is a loss that transcends any material calculation. His wealth was a memory. His legacy was gone. His heart, once filled with the joy of a loving family, was now a crater of unimaginable, echoing emptiness. In a single afternoon, the man who had been the greatest in all the East was left with nothing but the clothes on his back and a grief too profound for words. The totality and the speed of the destruction are designed to overwhelm, to leave no room for rationalization, no space for gradual adjustment. It is a full frontal assault on Job's faith, designed to push him past the breaking point, to provoke the very curse that Satan had predicted. How does a human soul possibly respond to such an onslaught? What reserves of faith or character could possibly withstand such a comprehensive devastation? The silence that follows the fourth messenger's report must have been deafening, pregnant with the weight of a loss that defies all comprehension. Job's response to this avalanche of catastrophic loss is perhaps the most astonishing and counterintuitive moment in the entire book. It defies all human logic, all natural psychological reactions. Faced with the utter ruin of his life and the death of all his children, what does this righteous man do? Does he scream in rage against an unjust universe? Does he curse the God who had seemingly abandoned him? Does he collapse into a catatonic state of shock and despair?
No.
The scripture tells us that Job got up and tore his robe and shaved his head. These are traditional, ancient Near Eastern signs of profound grief and mourning. He does not suppress his pain. He does not pretend to be stoic. He enters fully into the reality of his loss. He tears his robe, the symbol of his status and his wholeness. He shaves his head, a sign of humiliation and utter desolation. He is physically embodying the shattering of his world. But then he does something extraordinary. After expressing his grief, he fell to the ground in worship. Worship. In the very moment when his heart has every reason to accuse, to resent, to turn away from God, his first instinct is to bow down. This is not the worship of a man who understands what is happening. It is the worship of a man who, in the midst of his utter confusion and agony, chooses to reaffirm his ultimate allegiance. It is a declaration that his relationship with God is not contingent on his circumstances. And from this posture of worship, through the agony, he speaks the words that have echoed through millennia as a testament to an almost superhuman faith. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Let us unpack the profound theology embedded in this brief, heartbreaking statement. First, he acknowledges his ultimate creatureliness and dependence. Naked I came, and naked shall I return. He reminds himself that everything he had, his wealth, his children, his very life, was a gift. He came into the world with nothing, and he will leave with nothing. All the blessings he enjoyed were temporary stewardships, not permanent possessions. This perspective allows him to release his grip on what has been taken. Second, he affirms the sovereignty of God over all circumstances. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. He does not attribute his loss to the Sabaeans, the Chaldeans, the fire, or the wind. He sees beyond the secondary causes to the primary reality of God's permissive and sovereign will. This is not fatalism, it is a profound act of faith. It is the belief that even in the midst of chaos and apparent evil, God is still on the throne, and nothing happens outside the scope of his ultimate control. Third, and most astonishingly, he chooses to bless God in the midst of his pain. Blessed be the name of the Lord. He does not just accept his loss, he actively worships the one who allowed it. He declares that God's character, his name, is worthy of praise, regardless of his own personal circumstances. His worship is not based on what God has done for him, but on who God is. The narrator then adds the divine commentary on this incredible response. In all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. He has passed the first test. Satan's cynical prediction has been proven wrong. Job's faith is not merely transactional. It is real. It is resilient. It is anchored in something deeper than his own prosperity. The accuser's initial theory has been debunked. Job's piety was not merely a function of his prosperity. Even when stripped of everything he owned and everyone he loved, his integrity remained intact. But the accuser is not finished. The heavenly council convenes again. The angels present themselves before the Lord, and Satan is among them. Once again, the Lord initiates the conversation, almost rubbing the accuser's nose in his failed prediction. Have you considered my servant Job? There is no one on earth like him. He is blameless and upright, a man who fears God and shuns evil. And he still maintains his integrity, though you incited me against him to ruin him without any reason. God affirms Job's steadfastness and even acknowledges the injustice of the situation, stating that Job was ruined, without any reason, from his own behavior. But Satan, the eternal cynic, is quick with a retort. He shifts his ground. His new argument is essentially, okay, you've taken his possessions and his children, but you haven't touched the man himself. Of course, he still maintains his integrity. All that he has because of his own health and well-being. A man will give up everything else to save his own skin. He utters the famous, cynical proverb, skin for skin. A man will give all he has for his own life. He is arguing that Job's faith is still ultimately self-serving. It is rooted in the instinct for self-preservation. And he makes his second proposal. But now stretch out your hand and strike his flesh and bones, and he will surely curse you to your face. The accuser believes that physical suffering, the intimate invasion of Job's own body, will be the final straw. He believes that unbearable pain will finally break Job's spirit and expose the transactional nature of his faith. Once again, the Lord, in his sovereign wisdom and his unwavering confidence in his servant, grants permission for this second, even more severe test. But he sets a crucial boundary. He says to Satan, "Very well, then, he is in your hands, but you must spare his life." God allows the affliction, but he sets a limit. He remains in ultimate control. Job's life itself is off limits. This second heavenly council scene deepens the mystery and the significance of Job's suffering. It is not just a random tragedy. It is a targeted assault, allowed by God for a specific, albeit hidden, purpose. It is a continuation of the cosmic legal drama, a further testing of the nature of true faith. And it raises the stakes to an almost unbearable level. Job has already endured the loss of everything external. Now, the attack will turn inward, upon his own physical being. He is about to enter a new and even darker circle of hell, a place of constant, agonizing, and isolating pain. The question now becomes, can a faith that has survived the loss of everything around him survive the loss of his own physical integrity? Can a man still bless God when his own body has become a source of unrelenting torment? The accuser is betting everything on no. God is resting his case on the quiet, resilient integrity of his servant. And Job, unaware of this celestial wager, is about to be plunged into the furnace once more. The second wave of suffering descends upon Job with a brutal and intimate cruelty. The scripture tells us that Satan afflicted Job with painful sores from the soles of his feet to the crown of his head. This is a complete and total physical devastation. The sores are described as painful, suggesting a constant, agonizing affliction. They cover his entire body, leaving no part untouched. This is not a minor ailment. It is a catastrophic physical collapse. In ancient times, such skin diseases were often associated with divine judgment and resulted in social and religious ostracization. Job, the man who was once the greatest in the East, the respected patriarch, the generous benefactor, is now reduced to a figure of utter degradation. He takes a piece of broken pottery, a potsherd, and scrapes himself as he sits among the ashes. The ashes are a sign of mourning, but also perhaps the only place of slight relief for his tormented skin. The scraping is a desperate attempt to find some respite from the itching and the pain, a picture of profound misery and helplessness. He is now physically repulsive, an object of pity and perhaps even disgust. His physical suffering is compounded by his social isolation. He is no longer surrounded by his admiring servants or his joyful children. He is alone, sitting in the dust, scraping his own diseased flesh. This is a fall from the heights of honor to the very depths of human degradation. And it is in this moment of ultimate physical and social desolation that he faces his most intimate and perhaps his most dangerous temptation. It comes not from the accuser directly, but from the person closest to him, his own wife. She sees his suffering, she sees his unwavering piety, and she reaches her own breaking point. She says to him, with a bitterness born of shared grief, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." This is the voice of utter despair. It is the temptation to give up, to surrender to the darkness, to conclude that a faith that leads to such suffering is pointless. It is, in essence, the very curse that Satan had predicted Job would utter. His own wife is now echoing the accuser's argument. She is saying, "Your integrity has gotten you nowhere. It is worthless. Let go of it. Curse the God who has allowed this, and just end your misery." It is a temptation that comes not from a place of malice, but from a place of profound pain and perhaps even a twisted form of love, a desire to see her husband's suffering end, even if it means his spiritual destruction. Job's response to his wife is a testament to the depth of his character and the resilience of his faith, even in the midst of his agony. He replies, "You are talking like a foolish woman. Shall we accept good from God, and not trouble?" He does not minimize her pain, but he gently rebukes her perspective. He reaffirms his fundamental belief in the sovereignty of God, a sovereignty that encompasses both blessing and adversity. He refuses to adopt a faith that only accepts God when things are good. He understands that a true relationship with the Creator involves embracing the totality of His will, both the parts we understand and enjoy, and the parts that are painful and mysterious. His question is a profound challenge to any form of prosperity gospel or fair weather faith. And once again, the narrator adds the divine commentary. In all this, Job did not sin in what he said. He has passed the second test. Even when afflicted in his own body, even when tempted by his closest companion, his integrity holds. He refuses to curse God. Satan is defeated again. But Job's ordeal is far from over. He has withstood the initial shock of loss and the agony of physical pain. But now, he is about to enter a new and perhaps even more difficult stage of his suffering, the trial of meaning, the long and agonizing wrestling match with the question of why. Into this scene of desolate suffering, a new set of characters arrives. Job's three friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite. When they hear about all the troubles that had come upon him, they set out from their homes and meet together by agreement to go and sympathize with him and comfort him. These are not casual acquaintances. They are likely men of similar status and wisdom, peers who have known Job in his prosperity and are now coming to offer solace in his adversity. Their initial approach is a model of true and profound empathy. When they first see Job from a distance, they can barely recognize him. His physical transformation is so shocking, his suffering so great, that their first response is one of shared grief. They began to weep aloud, and they tore their robes and sprinkled dust on their heads. They enter into his suffering. They mirror his own posture of mourning. And then, they do perhaps the wisest and most compassionate thing that anyone does in the entire book. They sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights. No one said a word to him because they saw how great his suffering was. 7 days of silent presence. This is an extraordinary act of friendship. They understand that in the face of such overwhelming, inexplicable pain, words are often cheap, inadequate, and even insulting. Sometimes, the greatest comfort we can offer someone who is suffering is not our explanations, but simply our presence. It is the ministry of sitting in the ashes with them, of acknowledging the depth of their pain without trying to fix it or explain it away. For 7 days, they honor his grief with their silence. They are simply there, sharing his desolation. If the story had ended here, Job's friends would be remembered as heroes of compassion. But the silence cannot last forever. And it is when the words begin that the comfort ends and the true, deeper trial for Job commences. After 7 days, Job himself finally breaks the silence. And what comes out is not a cry of faith, but a torrent of raw, unfiltered anguish. He opens his mouth and curses the day of his birth. He laments, "May the day of my birth perish, and the night that said, 'A boy is conceived.' May that day turn to darkness. May God above not care about it. May no light shine on it." He wishes he had died at birth, or had been miscarried. He longs for the oblivion of the grave, where the wicked cease from turmoil and the weary are at rest. This is not a curse against God. It is a profound expression of existential despair, a cry from a man who has reached the absolute limit of his endurance, a man for whom life itself has become an unbearable burden. His lament is a raw, honest, and deeply uncomfortable outpouring of pain. It is the sound of a soul that feels utterly abandoned, not just by human comfort, but perhaps even by divine purpose. And it is this cry of raw anguish that finally opens the floodgates for his friends to speak. They have waited patiently. They have sat in silence. But now, hearing the depth of Job's despair, They feel compelled to offer their wisdom, to provide an explanation, to try to make sense of the senseless. And in doing so, they will move from being comforters to being accusers, and they will unintentionally become instruments of the very accuser who had instigated this entire ordeal. Job's raw and desperate lament, his cursing of the day he was born, serves as the trigger for his friends to finally break their 7-day silence. They have come to comfort, but hearing the depth of his despair, and perhaps scandalized by the raw edge of his grief which borders on what they perceive as blasphemy, they feel compelled to speak, to offer their theological wisdom, to provide an explanation for his suffering. And so begins the long and often painful cycle of speeches that forms the bulk of the book of Job. The first to speak is Eliphaz the Temanite, likely the oldest and perhaps the most respected of the three. He begins gently, almost tentatively, acknowledging the difficulty of speaking to someone in such pain. But he quickly moves to the core argument that will define the position of all three friends, the doctrine of retribution. It is the simple, seemingly logical, and deeply ingrained belief that God is just, and therefore, suffering must always be a direct consequence of sin. Good things happen to good people, and bad things happen to bad people. It is the oldest and perhaps the most persistent attempt to create a neat, tidy, and predictable moral universe. Eliphaz appeals to experience. Consider now, who, being innocent, has ever perished? Where were the upright ever destroyed? As I have observed, those who plow evil and those who sow trouble reap it. He is gently but firmly suggesting that Job's suffering must be the result of some hidden sin. He speaks of a mysterious nighttime vision, a spiritual encounter where a voice whispered to him the profound truth of human sinfulness and God's absolute holiness. Can a mortal be more righteous than God? Can even a strong man be more pure than his Maker? He asks. His point is that all humans are flawed, and perhaps Job, in his former prosperity, had a hidden pride or some unacknowledged transgression that has now brought about this divine discipline. His counsel to Job is therefore simple and predictable. If I were you, I would appeal to God. I would lay my cause before him. Blessed is the one whom God corrects, so do not despise the discipline of the Almighty. He urges Job to accept his suffering as a form of loving correction, to repent of his unknown sin, and to trust that God will eventually restore him. Eliphaz's speech is eloquent, it is pious, it is filled with traditional wisdom, and it is, in Job's specific situation, completely and utterly wrong. It is the application of a general truth that sin often leads to suffering, as an absolute and invariable law, a law that admits no exceptions. And in applying this rigid formula to Job's unique and inexplicable suffering, Eliphaz moves from being a comforter to being an accuser. He is offering a diagnosis that does not fit the patient's symptoms. He is trying to force Job's messy, chaotic reality into his own neat, theological box. And in doing so, he is adding the burden of false guilt to the already unbearable weight of Job's grief and pain. This is the great danger of offering easy answers to complex suffering. Our well-meaning attempts to explain the inexplicable can often inflict more pain than comfort. They can silence the sufferer, invalidate their experience, and implicitly accuse them of bringing their troubles upon themselves. Eliphaz represents the voice of conventional, comfortable, and ultimately inadequate human wisdom in the face of profound mystery. Job's response to Eliphaz's well-meaning but misguided counsel is a mixture of profound grief, sharp sarcasm, and a desperate longing for true understanding and vindication. He begins by defending the extremity of his lament. He cries out, "If only my anguish could be weighed, and all my misery be placed on the scales. It would surely outweigh the sand of the seas. No wonder my words have been impetuous." He is saying, "You cannot possibly understand the depth of my pain. My words may sound rash, but they are born of an agony that is beyond comprehension." He feels that Eliphaz's gentle rebuke is a profound underestimation of his suffering. He then turns his attention to the emptiness of his friend's comfort. He calls their arguments windy, their wisdom hollow. He longs for genuine sympathy, for someone to simply acknowledge his pain without trying to explain it away. He feels utterly abandoned, not just by God, but now also by his closest human companions. Anyone who withholds kindness from a friend forsakes the fear of the Almighty, he declares, a sharp rebuke to their failure of empathy. But the core of Job's response is his persistent and unwavering defense of his own integrity. He rejects Eliphaz's insinuation of hidden sin. He cries out, "Teach me, and I will be quiet. Show me where I have been wrong." How painful are honest words. But what do your arguments prove? He is open to correction, but he demands evidence. He knows, in the core of his being, that he has not committed some great transgression that would warrant this level of devastation. And this conviction leads him to his central and most agonizing struggle, his struggle with God himself. If his suffering is not a result of his sin, then where does it come from? Job's theology is still largely bound by the doctrine of retribution, just like his friends. And so, if he is innocent, the only conclusion he can draw is that God himself has become his enemy, that God is treating him unjustly. This is the terrifying and bewildering reality he is grappling with. He speaks of God shooting arrows at him, of God setting him up as a target. He longs for a confrontation, for a day in court, for a chance to plead his case before the Almighty. He cries out for a mediator, an umpire, someone who can stand between him and God and bridge the terrifying gap. If only there were someone to mediate between us, he laments, someone to bring us together, someone to remove God's rod from me, so that his terror would frighten me no more. Then I would speak up without fear of him, but as it is, I have no such help. This is a profound and a prophetic cry. Job, in the depths of his Old Testament despair, is expressing a deep human longing for the very thing that would one day be provided in the person of Jesus Christ, the one true mediator between God and man. Job's first reply sets the stage for the rest of the dialogue. He will not accept the easy answers of his friends. He will not betray his own integrity by confessing to sins he has not committed. And he will not let go of God, even when God feels like his adversary. He will continue to wrestle, to question, to lament, to plead, holding on to both his innocence and his faith, even when they seem to be in irreconcilable conflict. The second friend to speak, Bildad the Shuhite, takes a harsher and more traditionalist approach than Eliphaz. He seems less concerned with Job's personal feelings and more concerned with defending the established theological order. He begins by directly challenging Job's passionate defense of his innocence. "How long will you say such things?" he demands. "Your words are a blustering wind." He dismisses Job's cries as empty rhetoric. Bildad's core argument rests entirely on the unwavering principle of divine justice, the doctrine of retribution, which he presents not just as a matter of observation like Eliphaz, but as an unshakable truth based on ancient tradition. Does God pervert justice? He asks rhetorically. Does the Almighty pervert what is right? For Bildad, the answer is an absolute and unequivocal no. God is always just. Therefore, if suffering occurs, it must be deserved. He then applies this rigid logic directly and cruelly to the most painful of Job's losses, the death of his children. He says, "When your children sinned against him, he gave them over to the penalty of their sin." This is a breathtakingly insensitive and speculative accusation. Bildad has no evidence that Job's children had committed some terrible sin worthy of death. He is simply inferring it from the fact that they died tragically. He is using the doctrine of retribution as a blunt instrument, inflicting further pain on a grieving father. His counsel to Job is equally simplistic and harsh. He tells Job, "But if you will seek God earnestly and plead with the Almighty, if you are pure and upright, even now he will rouse himself on your behalf and restore you to your prosperous state." The implication is clear. Job is currently not pure and upright, and that is why God has not yet restored him. The burden of proof is entirely on Job. He must prove his innocence through repentance, and only then will God relent. Bildad appeals to the wisdom of the ancients, to the traditions passed down through generations. Ask the former generations and find out what their ancestors learned, he advises. He believes that the accumulated wisdom of the past confirms his simple formula: the righteous prosper and the wicked perish. He uses vivid natural imagery, like the papyrus reed needing marshland to grow, to illustrate that wickedness cannot ultimately thrive. Bildad represents the voice of rigid orthodoxy, the voice of tradition that has become detached from compassion and from the complexities of real life. He is so committed to defending his theological system that he is willing to sacrifice Job's reputation, Job's feelings, and even the memory of his children on its altar. He is a man who loves his doctrines more than he loves his suffering friend. His speech is a powerful warning against the dangers of a faith that is based only on tradition and dogma, a faith that has lost its heart, a faith that uses theological truths as weapons rather than as sources of comfort and hope. He demonstrates how even correct theological principles, when applied without wisdom, without empathy, and without a recognition of the profound mystery of God's ways, can become instruments of cruelty. Job's response to Bildad is filled with a sense of weariness, frustration, and a deepening awareness of the terrifying power and inscrutability of God. He begins by acknowledging the theoretical truth of Bildad's premise. Indeed, I know that this is true. Yes, Job agrees, in principle, God is just. But how can a mortal be righteous before God? This is the crux of his dilemma. He knows he is not perfect, but he also knows he has not committed the kind of heinous sin that would warrant this level of suffering according to the doctrine of retribution. And more profoundly, he recognizes the sheer impossibility of arguing his case before an all-powerful God. The power imbalance is infinite. Though one wished to dispute with him, he could not answer him 1 time out of 1,000, Job declares. He paints a picture of God's awesome and terrifying sovereignty over creation. God is the one who moves mountains without their knowing it, who shakes the earth from its place, who speaks to the sun, and it does not shine, who alone stretches out the heavens. Who is Job, a mere mortal, to argue with such a being? He feels utterly crushed, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of God's power. If it is a matter of strength, he is mighty. And if it is a matter of justice, who can challenge him? Job laments. He feels trapped. Even if he were righteous, he believes God could twist his words, condemn him arbitrarily. Though I am innocent, my mouth would condemn me. Though I am blameless, he would declare me guilty. This is the cry of a man who feels that the very system of justice has collapsed, that the judge himself has become his accuser. His only hope, he feels, is for God to simply relent, to withdraw his heavy hand. He longs for a reprieve, a moment to catch his breath before he dies. "Why did you bring me out of the womb?" he cries in despair. "I wish I had died before any eyes saw me." His speech is a raw and painful exploration of the human feeling of utter helplessness in the face of overwhelming power and inexplicable suffering. He is not denying God's existence or even his ultimate justice in a theoretical sense. He is crying out against the terrifying experience of God's apparent hostility. He is grappling with the profound existential dread that comes from feeling abandoned by the very source of all meaning and all hope. He is a man who is clinging to his integrity, but his spirit is being crushed under the weight of a divine silence that feels like condemnation. His friends offer him a neat theological system where everything makes sense. But Job's reality is messy, chaotic, and terrifyingly nonsensical, and he refuses to accept their easy answers. He chooses instead the more difficult, the more honest, and the more courageous path of wrestling directly with the terrifying mystery of God himself. The third friend, Zophar the Naamathite, enters the conversation with the harshest and most accusatory tone yet. He shows no patience for Job's continued insistence on his innocence or his questioning of God's justice. Zophar is a man of black and white thinking, a man who believes he possesses a direct insight into the mind of God, and he is deeply offended by what he perceives as Job's arrogant and blasphemous words. He begins by mocking Job's lengthy speeches. Are all these words to go unanswered? Is this talker to be vindicated? He dismisses Job's cries of pain as empty chatter. Zophar's core argument is a brutal reinforcement of the doctrine of retribution, but he adds a new and cruel twist. He argues not only that Job must be guilty of some hidden sin, but that his current suffering is actually less than his sin deserves. "Oh, how I wish that God would speak," Zophar declares that he would open his lips against you and disclose to you the secrets of wisdom, for true wisdom has two sides. Know this: God has even forgotten some of your sin. This is an astonishingly arrogant and cruel statement. He is claiming to know the mind of God, and he is telling Job that God is actually being merciful, that Job's unimaginable suffering is only a fraction of what he truly deserves for his secret wickedness. This is theological bullying of the worst kind. He is using the concept of God's inscrutable wisdom not as a source of humility, but as a weapon to condemn his suffering friend. Zophar then paints a vivid picture of the fate of the wicked, implicitly applying it all to Job. He speaks of the wicked man whose prosperity is fleeting, whose children will suffer, whose life will end in darkness and despair. His speech is filled with terrifying imagery designed to frighten Job into confession. He offers no comfort, no empathy, only condemnation and the threat of even greater judgment. His message is simple: you are a wicked man, Job. Your suffering proves it. Confess your hidden sin, and perhaps God will relent. But know that you deserve even worse than what you are getting. Zophar represents the voice of religious certainty that has become divorced from love. He is so confident in his own theological framework that he is completely blind to the reality of Job's experience and deaf to the cries of his heart. He is a man who uses his knowledge of God not to heal, but to wound. He embodies the danger of a faith that is all head and no heart, a faith that prioritizes doctrinal purity over compassionate engagement with human suffering. His speech is a stark reminder that theological correctness, when wielded without love, can be a tool of profound spiritual violence. He leaves Job feeling more accused, more isolated, and more desperate than ever. Job's reply to Zophar is dripping with sarcasm and a righteous anger. He has clearly had enough of his friend's simplistic and accusatory pronouncements. He begins with a biting retort: doubtless you are the people, and wisdom will die with you. He mocks their arrogant assumption that they possess all knowledge and understanding. He then goes on to assert that he is their equal in wisdom and experience. But I have a mind as well as you. I am not inferior to you. Who does not know all these things, he declares. He is saying that their arguments, based on the simple doctrine of retribution, are common knowledge, the stuff of popular wisdom. They are not offering him any profound insight. They are just repeating tired old formulas that clearly do not apply to his situation. Job then launches into a powerful and passionate critique of his friend's behavior. He accuses them of being worthless physicians, of whitewashing lies. They have come supposedly to comfort him, but all they have done is offer false diagnoses and inflict further pain. He challenges their presumption to speak for God. Will you speak wickedly on God's behalf? Will you speak deceitfully for him? Will you show him partiality? Will you argue the case for God? He is accusing them of defending God with lies, of trying to protect God's reputation by unjustly condemning Job. He argues that true piety would involve acknowledging the mystery of a situation, rather than forcing it into a preconceived theological box. Job then reiterates his unwavering commitment to his own integrity. He makes a powerful declaration: though he slay me, yet will I hope in him. I will surely defend my ways to his face. This is a statement of incredible, defiant faith. Even if God himself takes his life, Job will maintain his innocence and his trust in God's ultimate justice. He is willing to argue his case even in the face of death. He longs for a hearing, for a chance to plead his cause directly before God. He knows that if he could only have that audience, he would be vindicated. His speech is a powerful testament to the resilience of his spirit and the depth of his conviction. He refuses to be silenced by his suffering or by the accusations of his friends. He continues to wrestle, to question, to demand an answer, holding on to his faith in God even as he rails against the apparent injustice of his situation. He is a man who is caught in an agonizing paradox, but he refuses to let go of either side of it. He will not abandon his God, and he will not abandon his own integrity. And it is in this very tension, in this refusal to accept easy answers, that the true and profound wisdom of the book of Job begins to unfold. The subsequent chapters of the book of Job continue in a cyclical pattern. The three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar each speak 2 more times, except Zophar, who only speaks twice in total, and Job replies to each of them. The arguments of the friends do not evolve significantly. They essentially repeat and intensify their core assertion: Job must be guilty of some hidden sin to deserve such suffering. They become increasingly frustrated and angered by Job's persistent refusal to confess. Their tone becomes harsher, their accusations more specific, their attempts at comfort completely abandoned in favor of outright condemnation. They paint ever more vivid and terrifying pictures of the fate of the wicked, implicitly casting Job in that role. They are men who are trapped in their own rigid theological system, unable and unwilling to comprehend a reality that does not fit their formula. Their inability to listen, to empathize, or to acknowledge the mystery of Job's situation transforms them from friends into tormentors. They become a living embodiment of the very kind of hollow, judgmental religiosity that the book critiques. Job's responses, on the other hand, grow in their passion, their desperation, and their theological depth. He continues to vehemently defend his innocence, sometimes with weariness, sometimes with anger, sometimes with profound sadness. He catalogs his past acts of righteousness, his care for the poor, his integrity in business, his purity of heart, essentially putting himself on trial and finding himself not guilty. His frustration with his friends grows, and he repeatedly dismisses their counsel as worthless and cruel. But his central struggle remains his struggle with God. He oscillates between moments of profound faith and moments of near despair. He continues to long for a mediator, for an advocate, for someone who can plead his case in the heavenly court. He expresses a flickering hope in a future vindication, even beyond death, famously declaring, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end he will stand on the earth. And after my skin has been destroyed, yet in my flesh I will see God." This is a breathtaking glimpse of resurrection, hope in the midst of Old Testament darkness. Yet, at other times, he returns to his agonizing questions about God's justice. He challenges God directly, demanding to know why he is being afflicted, why God seems to be hiding his face from him. His speeches are a raw and censored and deeply human wrestling match with the most difficult questions of faith. He does not offer easy answers. He does not tie things up in neat theological bows. He lives in the tension, in the paradox, in the painful space between his experience of suffering and his belief in a just and good God. This long central section of the book, with its repetitive cycles of argument, is often difficult for modern readers. But its very repetitiveness serves a purpose. It demonstrates the utter inadequacy of human wisdom to explain the mystery of innocent suffering. It shows the bankruptcy of a theology that is based solely on the doctrine of retribution. And it validates the legitimacy of honest, passionate, and even angry questioning in the life of faith. Job teaches us that true faith is not the absence of doubt or struggle. It is the courage to keep wrestling with God, even when he is silent, even when he feels like our enemy. After the 3 cycles of speeches between Job and his friends have run their course, ending in an exhausted and unresolved stalemate, a new and unexpected voice enters the conversation. A young man named Elihu, who has been listening silently to the entire debate, finally speaks up. He has held his peace out of respect for the age and wisdom of the older men, but he is now burning with frustration, both at Job for justifying himself rather than God, and at the 3 friends for failing to refute Job's arguments and yet still condemning him. Elihu represents a new perspective, a younger generation offering a different theological approach. He begins by acknowledging the limitations of age and tradition, asserting that wisdom comes not just from years, but from the Spirit of God. He then proceeds to deliver 4 long speeches, offering a critique of both Job and his friends. He agrees with the friends that God is just and does not punish the innocent. But he criticizes them for condemning Job without proof and for failing to truly answer his arguments. He then turns to Job and offers a different understanding of the purpose of suffering. While the friends saw suffering only as punitive, a punishment for past sin, Elihu introduces the idea that suffering can also be corrective or preventive. He suggests that God might use suffering not just to punish wickedness, but to discipline the righteous, to humble them, to teach them, to warn them away from potential future sins, and ultimately, to draw them closer to himself. He speaks of God communicating through dreams, through sickness, through adversity, all as a means of getting our attention, of rescuing us from the pit. God disciplines people with pain on their beds, Elihu says, with ceaseless aching in their bones. But if someone is gracious enough to tell him, "Spare him from going down to the pit. I have found a ransom for him. Let his flesh be renewed like a child's. Let him be restored as in the days of his youth." Then that person can pray to God and find favor with him, and God restores that person's health. This is a significant theological development. Elihu is moving beyond the rigid retribution framework and offering a more nuanced and potentially more comforting understanding of suffering. He is suggesting that pain can be purposeful, that it can be a tool in the hands of a loving God for our ultimate good. However, Elihu's speeches are not without their own problems. He too can be harsh and accusatory towards Job. He sometimes misrepresents Job's arguments. And like the other friends, he speaks with a great deal of certainty about the hidden workings of God. While his perspective on corrective suffering adds an important dimension to the conversation, it is still ultimately a human attempt to explain the inexplicable. Elihu's intervention serves as a bridge. He effectively silences the flawed arguments of the three friends and prepares the way for the ultimate and final voice in the drama, the voice of God himself. Elihu, for all his youthful confidence, is still just another human perspective. And the book of Job teaches that all human perspectives, no matter how wise or well-intentioned, are ultimately inadequate in the face of the profound mystery of God's ways. Finally, after 37 chapters of human argument, of accusation, of lament, and of theological speculation, God himself breaks the silence. But he does not appear in a gentle whisper, as he would later to Elijah. He speaks to Job out of a storm, out of a whirlwind. The very setting of his appearance is a statement. The whirlwind is a symbol of awesome, untamed, and uncontrollable power. It is a force of nature that defies human understanding and human control. God is about to reveal himself not as a defendant in Job's courtroom, not as a subject for human analysis, but as the sovereign, all-powerful, and utterly transcendent creator of the universe. And his speech is one of the most breathtaking and humbling passages in all of literature. God does not answer Job's questions. He does not explain the reason for his suffering. He does not mention the heavenly wager with Satan. He does not vindicate Job's innocence or condemn the friend's accusations. Instead, he turns the tables. He begins to question Job. He launches into a majestic, poetic, and utterly overwhelming interrogation of Job's knowledge and power, contrasting it with his own infinite wisdom and might as the creator and sustainer of the cosmos. He begins with the very foundations of the earth. "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation?
Tell me if you understand."
Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set? Or who laid its cornerstone? While the morning stars sang together and all the angels shouted for joy. God is immediately establishing the vast, unbridgeable chasm between the creator and the creature. He is reminding Job of his finitude, his limitations, his utter lack of participation in the grand project of creation. He continues, question after rhetorical question, piling up images of his sovereign power over the natural world. He challenges Job. Have you ever commanded the morning? Do you know where the darkness resides? Have you entered the storehouses of the snow or seen the storehouses of the hail? Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? Can you send lightning bolts on their way? Do you give the horse its strength or clothe its neck with a flowing mane? Does the hawk take flight by your wisdom? Does the eagle soar at your command? Each question is designed not to elicit an answer, but to produce a profound sense of awe and humility. God is systematically dismantling Job's anthropocentric worldview, his assumption that the universe revolves around him and his concerns. He is pulling back the curtain on a cosmos that is infinitely larger, more complex, and more mysterious than Job could ever have imagined. He is revealing a world that is teeming with wonders and terrors that exist entirely outside the realm of human utility or understanding. This is not a cruel mocking of Job's suffering. It is a radical and a necessary recalibration of his perspective. It is an invitation for Job to lift his eyes from the ashes of his own small story and to behold the breathtaking majesty and the inscrutable wisdom of the God who holds the entire universe in his hands. God's speech from the whirlwind continues, moving from the inanimate cosmos to the wild and untamed animal kingdom. This section is particularly fascinating and crucial for understanding the book's message. God does not point Job to the peaceful, domesticated animals that serve human needs. Instead, he focuses on the creatures that live outside the realm of human control, creatures that often seem strange, dangerous, or even monstrous to us. He speaks of the wild mountain goats and the deer giving birth in secret places. He speaks of the wild donkey, roaming free, scorning the noisy city. He speaks of the wild ox, powerful and untamable, refusing to serve man. He speaks of the ostrich, a creature that seems foolish and careless, yet is part of his design. He speaks of the magnificent war horse, pawing the ground, eager for battle, laughing at fear. He speaks of the hawk and the eagle, soaring in the heavens, guided by an instinct he has given them. This tour of the wild kingdom is a profound theological statement. God is revealing that his creative wisdom and his providential care extend far beyond the concerns of humanity. He delights in a universe that is wild, diverse, and often seemingly purposeless from a purely human perspective. The ostrich may seem foolish to us, but it has its place in God's creation. The wild ox may be useless for plowing, but God rejoices in its untamed strength. This is a radical decentering of humanity. Job, in his suffering, had become consumed with his own case, his own sense of injustice. He had implicitly assumed that the universe should revolve around his understanding of fairness. God is now showing him a universe that is infinitely larger, stranger, and more God-centered than he had ever imagined. He is inviting Job to trust in a wisdom that is far beyond his own comprehension, a wisdom that governs not just human affairs, but the migration of birds, the birth cycles of mountain goats, and the instincts of the war horse. The climax of this section comes with the descriptions of two immense and terrifying creatures, Behemoth and Leviathan. Behemoth is described as a massive, powerful land creature, perhaps a hippopotamus or a mythical beast, whose strength is in his loins, who feeds on grass like an ox, and whom God calls the first of the works of God. Leviathan is an even more fearsome creature, a monstrous sea serpent, perhaps a crocodile or a whale, or more likely, a symbol of the untamed, chaotic forces of the deep. He is covered in impenetrable scales, breathes fire, and strikes terror into the hearts of all who see him. God asks Job, "Can you pull in Leviathan with a fishhook or tie down his tongue with a rope? Can you make a pet of him like a bird, or put him on a leash for the young women in your house?" Any hope of subduing him is false. The mere sight of him is overpowering. These creatures represent the aspects of creation that are utterly beyond human control, the forces of chaos and power that remind us of our own fragility and finitude. By pointing to Behemoth and Leviathan, God is not saying that evil is ultimate. He is saying that his own creative power and his sovereign wisdom are so vast that they encompass even these terrifying and seemingly chaotic elements of the world. He is the master even of Leviathan. And if he can govern these untamable forces, cannot Job trust him to govern the seemingly chaotic circumstances of his own life? The entire speech from the whirlwind is a form of divine therapy. It is designed to shrink Job's problems by expanding his vision of God. It is an invitation to move from a position of demanding answers to a position of humble, awe-filled trust in the one whose wisdom is as vast and as untamed as the universe he has made. Job's response to this overwhelming revelation of God's majesty and wisdom is profound and transformative. After God's first speech from the whirlwind, Job is utterly silenced. He replies with a newfound humility, "I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer, twice, but I will say no more. The sheer scale of God's wisdom, displayed in the wonders of creation, has completely dismantled his previous arguments. He recognizes the arrogance of his own attempts to put God on trial. He has been confronted with his own finitude, his own ignorance, and he is humbled. But God is not finished. He speaks a second time, pressing Job even further, challenging him to take up the role of God, to govern the universe, to humble the proud and to crush the wicked, if he thinks he is able. This second speech drives Job to an even deeper level of repentance and understanding. And his final response is one of the most important and moving moments in the entire book. He says to the Lord, "I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted." You asked, "Who is this that obscures my plans without knowledge?" Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. He confesses his own ignorance. He acknowledges that he was speaking out of turn, trying to grasp mysteries that were far beyond his comprehension. And then comes the crucial turning point. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. This is the heart of the transformation. Job's faith has moved from a second-hand, theoretical knowledge of God, hearing of him, to a first-hand, experiential encounter, seeing him. He has not received answers to his questions about why he suffered, but he has received something far more profound, a direct revelation of who God is. And this encounter with the person of God has changed everything. It has recontextualized his suffering. It has silenced his complaints, not by answering them, but by overwhelming them with the sheer majesty and trustworthiness of God's character. And this leads to his final declaration, "Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes." What is he repenting of? Not of the hidden sins that his friends had accused him of. He is repenting of his pride. He is repenting of his presumption in questioning God's wisdom and justice. He is repenting of his self-righteous insistence on his own understanding. He is surrendering his case. He is letting go of his need for answers and is choosing instead to rest in the mystery of God's character. This is the climax of Job's spiritual journey. It is not an intellectual resolution, but a relational one. He finds peace not by understanding his suffering, but by encountering the God who is sovereign over his suffering. He learns that the ultimate answer to the problem of pain is not an explanation, but a person. It is the presence of God himself, revealed in all his awesome, terrifying, and ultimately trustworthy glory. The conclusion of the book of Job brings the story back to the earthly realm, but with a new and restored perspective. God, having spoken to Job and brought him to a place of humble repentance and renewed faith, now turns his attention to Job's three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. And his words to them are sharp and rebuking. He says to Eliphaz, "I am angry with you and your two friends, because you have not spoken the truth about me, as my servant Job has." This is a stunning reversal. The friends, who had been so confident in their theological correctness, who had claimed to be defending God's honor, are now condemned by God himself. And Job, the man they had accused of blasphemy and hidden sin, the man who had wrestled so honestly and so painfully with God, is affirmed. God declares that Job, in his raw, questioning, and often angry laments, had actually spoken more truthfully about God than his friends had with their neat, tidy, and ultimately false theological system. This is a profound statement about the nature of true faith and true speech about God. God prefers the honest, messy wrestling of a Job to the pious, judgmental platitudes of the friends. He values authenticity over theological correctness that lacks compassion. He honors the struggle of a faith that refuses to let go, even when it does not understand. The friends had tried to defend God by simplifying him, by reducing him to a predictable formula. Job, in his wrestling, had honored God by acknowledging his mystery, his freedom, his sovereignty, even when it was painful. God then commands the three friends to take 7 bulls and 7 rams and go to Job and sacrifice a burnt offering for themselves. And he adds this crucial instruction: "My servant Job will pray for you, and I will accept his prayer and not deal with you according to your folly." This is the ultimate vindication for Job and a profound act of restorative justice. The very man they had condemned must now become their intercessor. They must humble themselves before him, and their restoration is dependent on his prayer for them. And Job, in a beautiful demonstration of the grace he himself has received, obeys. He prays for his friends. He does not hold their false accusations against them. He becomes an agent of reconciliation. And the scripture tells us, after Job had prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before. The restoration of Job is comprehensive. All his relatives and former acquaintances come to comfort him and show him sympathy, bringing him gifts of silver and gold. He has 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, 1,000 donkeys, exactly double his previous wealth. And God blesses him with another family, 7 sons and 3 daughters, the same number as before. His daughters are described as the most beautiful in all the land, and uniquely, they are given an inheritance along with their brothers. Job lives for another 140 years, seeing his children and their children to the 4th generation. He dies, old and full of years. It is a picture of a complete and abundant restoration. But we must be careful not to misinterpret this ending. The restoration is not a simple reward for his endurance, as if God were finally paying him back for his troubles. That would reduce the story back to the very doctrine of retribution that the book has so powerfully deconstructed. Rather, the restoration is a sign, a tangible symbol of God's grace and his ultimate redemptive purpose. It is a demonstration that God is able not only to sustain us through suffering, but also to bring blessing and fruitfulness out of it. It is a picture of the resurrection hope, the promise that the losses of this life are not the final word, and that God's ultimate plan is one of restoration and renewal. The ending is not the reason for Job's faithfulness, it is the result of God's faithfulness. Job did not endure because he knew this happy ending was coming. He endured because he trusted the character of God, even in the darkness. The book of Job does not offer a neat and tidy solution to the problem of suffering. It does not give us a formula that explains why bad things happen to good people. In fact, it actively dismantles the most common and persistent human attempts to create such formulas. The doctrine of retribution, the idea that all suffering is a direct punishment for sin, is exposed as inadequate, simplistic, and often cruel. Elihu's suggestion that suffering can be corrective discipline adds a layer of nuance, but it too falls short of explaining the sheer scale and apparent randomness of Job's devastation. The book ultimately leaves the why of suffering shrouded in mystery. And this is, perhaps, its greatest and most profound wisdom. It teaches us that there are realities in the universe, aspects of God's sovereign plan, that are simply beyond our human comprehension. Our finite minds cannot possibly grasp the infinite wisdom of the Creator. To demand a full explanation for our suffering is, in itself, an act of pride, an attempt to make ourselves the measure of all things. The book of Job invites us instead to a posture of humility, of awe, and of trust. It shifts our focus from the problem of suffering to the person of God. The ultimate answer to Job's agony is not an explanation, it is an encounter. When Job sees God, when he experiences the breathtaking reality of God's majesty, wisdom, and power, his questions do not disappear, but they lose their tormenting power. He finds peace not by understanding his circumstances, but by trusting the character of the God who is sovereign over his circumstances. This is the profound reorientation that the book offers. It teaches us that the path through suffering is not primarily one of intellectual understanding, but of relational trust. Our goal is not to figure out why this is happening, but to cling to who God is in the midst of it. We are called to trust His goodness, even when our circumstances scream the opposite. We are called to trust His wisdom, even when His ways seem inscrutable. We are called to trust His sovereignty, even when the world feels chaotic and out of control. This is not an easy faith. It is a faith that often involves wrestling, questioning, lamenting, just as Job did. But it is a faith that is ultimately anchored not in our ability to understand, but in God's ability to be trusted. The book of Job gives us permission to grieve, permission to question, permission to be honest about our pain. But it ultimately calls us to move beyond our questions to a place of awe-filled worship, a place where we can say with Job, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you," and find, in that encounter, the strength to endure and the hope that transcends all understanding. The enduring legacy of the Book of Job is its profound and unflinching honesty about the reality of human suffering and the nature of faith. It stands as a timeless corrective to any theology that is too neat, too simplistic, or too triumphalistic. It reminds us that the life of faith is not a guarantee of a life free from pain, loss, or confusion. In fact, it often involves walking through deep valleys and dark nights of the soul. Job's story validates the experience of the sufferer. It gives voice to the raw, uncomfortable, and often taboo emotions of grief, anger, despair, and doubt. It assures us that it is okay to cry out to God, to question Him, to wrestle with Him. Our honest laments are not a sign of a lack of faith. They can be an expression of a faith that is deep enough to be honest. Job teaches us that true piety is not about maintaining a stoic, unflappable facade, but about bringing our whole, broken, messy selves into the presence of God. The book also provides a powerful critique of shallow and judgmental religiosity. The speeches of Job's friends serve as a perpetual warning against the danger of offering easy answers to complex pain. They remind us that our primary calling in the face of suffering is not to be theologians, but to be comforters. It is to practice the ministry of presence, of empathy, of simply sitting in the ashes with those who weep, without feeling the need to explain or to fix. True comfort often comes not through our words, but through our silent, compassionate presence. And ultimately, the Book of Job points us to the hope that is found only in a direct, personal encounter with the living God. Job's transformation comes not when he receives answers, but when he receives God Himself. This is the ultimate hope for every sufferer. Our deepest need in the midst of pain is not for an explanation, but for a presence. It is the assurance that we are not alone, that there is a God who sees, who cares, and who is sovereign even over the seemingly meaningless chaos of our lives. This message finds its ultimate fulfillment in the New Testament, in the person of Jesus Christ. Jesus is the ultimate answer to the problem of suffering, not because He explains it away, but because He enters into it. He is Emmanuel, God with us, even in our deepest pain. On the cross, He Himself endures the ultimate suffering, the ultimate abandonment, the ultimate silence of God. He becomes the ultimate Job figure, the righteous sufferer who takes upon himself the weight of the world's sin and sorrow. And in His resurrection, He offers us the ultimate hope, the promise that suffering and death are not the final word, that there is a restoration coming, a new creation where He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain. The Book of Job, therefore, does not leave us in the ashes. It leaves us with our eyes lifted, waiting in hope, trusting in the character of a God who is both sovereignly powerful and intimately compassionate, the God who met Job in the whirlwind, and who meets us in the person of His Son.